Hi, and welcome to Own Your Divine Light Show. I am Janet Miller, and I invite you to listen to Lee Lawrence, an internationally known medical, psychological intuitive. Lee's scientific research into the existence of the human soul, and how it works takes science beyond its current limits. Lee, for many years, was a successful certified public accountant, even establishing his own firm. He also taught tax law for Penn State and several other universities. However, stress took a toll, and nearing a point of burnout, Lee had a profound spiritual experience, leaving him with unusual psychic and paranormal abilities. Welcome, Lee. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, Janet, for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome, Lee. I'm so happy that you joined me in this wonderful opportunity for people to hear your story. So, Lee, I really would love you to start from the beginning. And could you tell our audience how you developed your spiritual abilities and how they awakened in you?
How I developed them? I really did. They just happened to me. I was a type A, own it or control it businessman and non-emotional until I went through my near-death experience. And in doing so, it shifted my consciousness, and it actually changed my brain that it was no longer locked into the lower frequencies of consciousness. I'm not going to bore everyone with the details, but generally the human brain functions from about 0 to 30 hertz. Mine started going up way above that into what's called the gamma frequencies. And my perception of reality changed to the point where other people's consciousness, including their stored memories of their thoughts, their past experiences, became physical objects to me. And thus, I found as I was walking up to people, I was able to perceive their stored memories in sequence as I approached them from conception through current. The memories that had extreme emotion, of course, were the ones that were amplified and picked up the strongest. So what happened, this changed my whole perception of reality in many ways, and I needed to understand this. So I ended up going back and picking up a degree in psychology, which didn't help me very much, and then went on to study neuroscience for the last roughly 20 years in order to determine exactly what happened to me. And in doing so, what it gave me was an understanding from a scientific perspective of not only why religions teach what they view. I view religions as theories and philosophies of the anatomy and physiology of the human soul. But because the human soul's physical to me, I can look at all the different religions and say, you're all correct, but it's like the 5 blind men that are led to an elephant for the first time, and each one gets a different part, and they argue and fight with each other over who's correct, when if they could perceive the total elephant, they'd say, we're all correct, and thank you for adding your input to help me to understand mine better. And that's the way it is with religions. If people understand the human soul, it's not just a theory, it is a physical, tangible object that actually goes out about 15 feet in all directions from the physical body. And your memories are stored in reverse sequence. So when I'm at 15 feet away from a person and I step into a memory, I know what a person's mother thought of their father when they were in the mother's womb, even though the person I'm working with is now 50 or 60 years old or older. So I never considered psychology a science because of the biased variable of perception. If I touch you, if you hear something, if you see something, that is going to stimulate your critical mind, and that's going to change any output or any measurable result. But what really blew me away, in fact, is when I realized that I could have people close their eyes. I don't say anything, I don't touch them in any way, and a total stranger could stand there, and if I felt a high emotion, negative emotion memory in their soul, if I reached out and merely poked it with my finger, it would knock them off their feet, even though they're many feet from me. So I started realizing that what I am doing does to the stored memories in the soul, scientifically, the same thing that X-rays do to bones. I don't consider myself an intuitive. It's merely my perception of reality is that these things are physical objects. Now, how did this happen? Every human being, their perception of reality is a function of the frequency of consciousness from which they view it. Einstein once said, if you sit on a hot plate for a second, it seems like an hour. If a beautiful woman sits on your lap for an hour, it seems like a second. But he never entered the variable, which is the frequency of consciousness. When you are thinking positive thoughts, loving thoughts, you're raising the frequency of consciousness. When you're holding on to fear, anger, guilt, worry, you're tuning your consciousness to lower frequencies. I feel people's thoughts as physical objects. For example, if I step into a memory where someone experienced fear, the bottom of my feet cramp up. That's the effect of fear on that person's soul. So I went through a little bit of what happened to me, but the ultimate goal, because the profound love that you experience when you reach these higher levels of consciousness, which is much easier when you let go of your physical body and you die. The profound love is so great that when you come back into your physical body, you just want to die again. I didn't want to be here.
Wow.
And what I found was it's a lot harder to learn to love life than what it is to get rid of your fear of death. So my goal became to achieve that same level of bliss and that union with the higher realms of consciousness that I achieved in my near-death experience. And what I realized is that in Christianity, when they talk about being born again, they really don't understand it. All it is transcending self. And when you do that, you begin to perceive directly from your consciousness rather than being restricted to your physical body and your five senses. If you've ever heard a person say, my life flashed before my eyes, all that is their conscious awareness is no longer restricted to their physical body. And as it expands away from their physical body through their soul, that's the life review process. That's the same field that has the memories in it that's physical to me and I store. So a couple of concepts that religions teach, and I use that word plural, the concept of sin. I define sin as anything that creates an obstacle to love within the human soul. Now, why is that important? Because you need to stabilize your consciousness. Your soul consists of two counter-rotating fields of consciousness, one being the masculine aspect, the other being the feminine. Those two can only be held together by love and stabilized by love. This is why Bowlby and Ainsworth and attachment theory and mother bonding with child is so important, so critical to the development of a child, because it's the mother's love that stabilizes the child's consciousness so that they can then grow into a healthy adult. So I define sin, again, as anything that creates an obstacle to love within your soul, which many times is based upon your perception, not necessarily reality. At the second concept that people get confused with is the concept of God, as though it's some deity that sits on a throne. I define God as any level of consciousness that exists above the level that I am at. So when Jesus went into the forest and came out of the wilderness and said, I am one with my Father, that is virtually the same thing that Buddha said when he sat under the Bodhisattva tree and he said, I'm one with everything. And what happens is, as you expand your conscious awareness, now notice I'm using the word conscious awareness and not consciousness, because you are already one with those higher levels of consciousness. What you're doing is expanding your conscious awareness to become one with those levels of consciousness.
Wow.
So the awakening process is really just increasing your awareness. It's not, in fact, the greatest thing that you can do, and this is what Christianity teaches, this is what Buddhist teaches, that all suffering is caused by attachment. Well, what is that attachment? It's to this level of reality in our physical body. So when Buddha sat under the Bodhisattva tree and became enlightened, he didn't sit down thinking, I'm going to become enlightened. He had tried everything to become enlightened and nothing worked. And he gave up, and he sat down underneath the tree and gave up. And that's when it happened. So that Jesus, when he went into the wilderness, he didn't go into the wilderness to find God. He had tried everything to find God. And he went into the wilderness to give up, to die. And in doing so, the dying daily concept is letting go of this physical reality so that you can tune your consciousness to a higher frequency where everyone can perceive what is referred to as God, or become Buddha, which Buddha, although it's the name that is given to Siddhartha Gautama, it's actually a term for anyone who becomes enlightened. And the same thing is true with Christ or Christ consciousness. The concept that I use to help people to understand spiritual growth is Russian nesting dolls, and think that I'm the little doll in the middle and God is the big outer doll. And there's many dolls that exist between me and God. And my goal is to expand my consciousness and grow. And in doing so, I'm going to have to go through every one of those dolls that is between me and God, which are all the enlightened teachers that have come here to earth to help us grow. So if a Christian says there's only one way to God and that's through Jesus, I'll say, I believe that. But if a Buddhist said there's only one way to God and that's through Buddha, I'd say, I believe that too. Because you can't get to the highest level without going through all the other levels in between. So a couple things about the human soul that are really important for people to understand about spiritual growth. There's really 3 stages to spiritual development. We start off in dependency. We've surrendered our authority to someone else. Mm-hmm. You can't grow spiritually as long as you're in a dependency mode. If someone else is holding your authority, then you don't own it to be able to surrender it to a higher level of consciousness. So the first step is actually building your ego, self-actualization, finding out who you are. This is where you say to yourself, I'm in control of my life, not other people, and I make the decisions, and if I'm successful, it's my benefit. I'm responsible for the consequences of my actions and vice versa. Hopefully we don't build a Taj Mahal ego, because if we do, we have to tear it down before we can go to the next level of spiritual development. And that is the midlife crisis, where bad things start to happen in our life. We encounter illness, financial ruin, our relationships break up. We lose our identity, our ego identity, that we keep patting ourselves in the back and swelling our chest and saying, I'm somebody important. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. If I were in control, bad things wouldn't happen. But bad things are happening in my life. Thus the, I'm not in control, which is what leads us into midlife crisis. The problem is in therapy today and in virtually every modality, we take antidepressants and we take drugs to try and block the discomfort of this losing our identity. It doesn't help us go through it. It merely blocks us from the discomfort that is motivating us to grow spiritually. It's tough for some people to understand this, especially who have experienced it. But depression is actually the discomfort of your soul not wanting to let go as you want to move, as you're trying to grow and move forward. And that is true whether you're coming out of dependency on parents and going through teenage transition to try and find yourself, or if you're going through a midlife crisis and you're losing yourself. So the third stage in soul development is self-transcendence. That's the whole goal for being here in the physical body. There's two ways for people to die. One way is your body is that unhealthy and shot that your soul can no longer occupy it. And when your soul departs your body, you're dead. Your cells will not function without your soul. Incidentally, your soul is what creates and manifests your physical body. It is the life force energy that is in you. If someone dropped an atomic bomb on top of your head and not one cell of your body is left, it doesn't harm your soul at all. Your physical body is merely a cocoon for your soul to grow at these lower stages to become whole, just as the mother's womb is a cocoon for your soul to develop in the physical until you can live on your own. So the whole goal of being here is to transcend self, which is the second way to die. That's the whole purpose of life, is to raise your conscious awareness beyond your physical body. Because in doing so, you tap into these higher levels of consciousness, which you perceive as light. One of the attributes of a higher level of consciousness is light. It's an intrinsic characteristic. When I'm in meditation, even when I am at a level that we refer to as heaven and experiencing bliss, I can perceive the levels above me, which are even brighter light. When I see the Holy Spirit, for example, I perceive it as a golden light, not quite as bright, a liquid light. So what happens is when we die, or we can do this in meditation, when you leave your physical body, you begin to perceive directly from your consciousness. You see, you hear, you feel. All of your five senses work directly from your consciousness. With the exception, you will not feel what is going on in your physical body because you've moved your conscious awareness beyond it. So this is why you don't feel pain. So when people refer to the darkness, many people who have a near-death experience talk about going into the darkness. The Tibetans and the Egyptians wrote about this in their books of the dead. It's an etheric layer of darkness. They call it the bardo. And the bardo is an etheric fence, so that if your soul tries to cross over to the higher levels and it's not ready to, why would it not be ready to? If you're holding on to fear or anger or guilt, you cannot cross through the bardo until you let go of those things. So as you move into the bardo, you'll start to see some misshapen beings, and they're all illusions, but their purpose is to create fear in you. When you experience this fear, you then drift back down to the lower level, and this is how ghosts exist. They are spirits who are stuck at this level of consciousness because they can't cross over into the higher realm. Now, they're not necessarily stuck forever. Go ahead.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt because everything you're saying is flowing, and I don't want to interrupt. But the bardo, I heard that it's a place where if you pass over, like you're saying, you're not supposed to even interact with any of these beings because then you won't make it across. Now you're giving it a different level, which says if you hold on to guilt or fear or any of those things, that's what's going to pull you back. So that's interesting, that concept.
Well, you've probably heard of people talking about the tunnel with the light shining at the other end of it. All that is an opening in the bardo.
Okay.
And the bright light that people refer to is merely the higher level of consciousness coming down through that portal. And when that higher level of consciousness comes into your awareness, the love and the bliss that you experience is so great that it's impossible to even experience fear no matter what you perceive, because that divine love or perfect love casts out fear. So the portal is actually just a transition through the layer of darkness to get you to the other side. Now, you can do this same thing in meditation. I've also done it many times with people as they were dying to help them cross over.
Wow.
I've done it with people who were stuck here as souls and they were holding on to fear. This is why other people's prayers are so important for someone who is either hospitalized or who is in the process of dying, because your prayers protect them from external fear and lower level energies that hold them back.
Wow.
All prayers are you tuning your consciousness to a higher level and offering it to someone else. Now,
it's beautiful.
So I pick up, there's one demonstration that I do quite often where I'll say to someone I'm with, think of someone anywhere in the world. And as soon as they think of them, I'll tell them and describe the other person and say, here's what's going on with them. Because once you connect to the higher level of consciousness, the higher frequency, and you're one with that greater consciousness, then everyone on earth exists within you. So that's why time and space collapse. So that if everyone exists within you, there is no distance. It's not like you're on this side of the earth and they're on the other. You immediately tune into, it's like being connected to the internet on the World Wide Web, and you're talking to someone on the other side of the world. Instantaneously, the same thing happens with consciousness, because you're connected to that higher web of consciousness. Now, there's many layers even above that. But right now, we are in this incubator of Earth in order to raise our consciousness to the level of transcending self. We as a society are about to come into a major midlife crisis.
Wow.
It's a diminishing of the ego and a diminishing of the self-identity. The problem is there are many old souls that are here on earth right now. And for the same reason that you don't want your seeds to sprout in the middle of the winter, many old souls have taken on very difficult lives this time through. Because they didn't want an old soul to sprout early, meaning 30, 40 years ago. It's imperative that people awaken at the right time.
Wow.
And we are right now in the springtime of soul growth. But part of the springtime of soul growth is plowing the field in order to get rid of the old so that the new seeds can sprout. My primary reason, after 30 years since my near-death experience in 1988, I kept getting the message, it's not time to share yet. It's not time to share yet. 30 years of frustration. It's not time yet.
Wow.
Only recently that has changed. And I travel around and do some lectures and workshops, and I'll have people coming up to me and they'll say, I don't know what's going on. My body just keeps shaking as I'm sitting here listening to this presentation. What that is old souls, that their soul is hearing the message that it's needing in order to trigger the awakening process. One of the attributes of higher consciousness is not just light at these higher frequencies, but these higher frequencies, if they move into your physical body and your physical body is not awakened yet and it's not used to it yet, it'll start shaking. This is the reason why the Quakers are called the Quakers and the Shakers are called the Shakers. And I've watched this in people who meditate, and if they don't stabilize, if they don't get rid of the obstacles to love in their soul, and they try to grow spiritually, they won't be able to grow because their soul is like a tire on a car that's out of balance if the belt shifts. At slow speeds, you don't even notice it's out of balance. But at high speeds, the whole car starts shaking. This same thing is true for the human physical body and soul if you have an obstacle to love. It's like having a wet blanket and putting it in the spin cycle of a washer, and the whole washer starts wobbling back and forth until the safety switch shuts it off. Your brain does that same thing. We have GABA inhibitory neurons in our brain that shut down the pyramidal transmission neurons if they start functioning at too high of a frequency. EEGs are actually measuring what's called the action potential firing rate in the neurons, in the pyramidal neurons. This is like the spark plug wires on your car. Mm-hmm. The spark has to go through in order to ignite the fuel to make your engine run. If you want your engine to run faster, you put the gas pedal down, and all of a sudden the sparks are going through faster in order for your engine to fire faster. Same thing happens in the human brain. So that as your neurons are firing faster, your consciousness can expand. Think of a merry-go-round. If you're standing in the center, a 10-foot merry-go-round on a playground, and you're standing in the center, and you're spinning around, you're going very slow. But if you're out at the outer perimeter of that merry-go-round, your consciousness is moving so fast that you can barely hold on. That same thing is true of human consciousness. As you expand your consciousness out, it increases in speed. Think of your processing speed on your computer.
Okay, yep.
The faster your processing speed, the faster it can process information. Same thing is true with the human consciousness. In fact, I have a very difficult time when I'm meditating and these ideas and concepts will come in. For example, time is not a function of the speed of light, like Einstein and others said. And his whole bubble theory and all of that was because he really didn't understand consciousness. He eliminated the variable of consciousness from his formula. Time is a function of the frequency of consciousness divided by the speed of light. So that as you increase the speed of your consciousness and it approaches the speed of light, which you can do if you cleanse your soul to the obstacles to love so it stabilizes, and then you focus on the higher frequencies. Right there are Jesus's commandments that he said are the most important commandments to the Pharisees. One is love God with all your mind, heart, being, etc. All he was saying was always strive to tune your consciousness to the highest frequency. The second commandment was love thy neighbor as yourself. All he was saying was find and remove the obstacles to love that exist within you, because they're going to destabilize you so that you can't do the most important thing, which is tune your consciousness to the highest frequency. So in short, you can say spiritual growth really has three stages. You're in charge of me, dependency. I'm in charge of me, self-actualization. Something greater than me is in charge of me. Now, one of the things that is true statements in Buddhism. Number one is you can only become aware of one level of consciousness above which you exist. Okay. So when you're in dependency, you can become aware of self-identity, but you can't be in dependency and be in charge of yourself. You can't be in charge of yourself and be transcended at the same time. You have to let go of where you're at and move to the next level.
Gotcha.
So enlightenment and this is, I wish that everyone could understand this concept. Enlightenment is not the tree realizing it's in the forest. That's just awareness.
Okay.
Enlightenment is the tree realizing it is the forest. Enlightenment is not the drop of water realizing it's in the ocean. Enlightenment is the drop of water realizing it is the ocean. So as Jesus said when he came out of the wilderness, my Father and I are one, or Buddha said, I am one with everything. You, when you transcend self, realize that you are one with God. However you choose to name that God, I identify God as any level of consciousness that exists above the level that I do. So was Jesus God? Yes. Was Buddha God? Yes. Was Krishna God? Yes. Because their consciousness existed above me.
Wow.
Thus, the Hindu concept of putting the picture of your guru, even if they have passed, or your guru lineage next to you when you meditate, because you are actually connecting to those higher consciousnesses and it's helping to lift you up. Wow. So it sounds, what I've done is I've said, here's how I attained my abilities. But that's not important, and it's not about me.
But it's so interesting.
But what I'm describing is how every single human being can grow spiritually to these higher levels.
Which is very important information that we need to know.
Even death is merely a learning experience for the soul.
Sure. Okay.
A lot of these diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia are not diseases of your soul. They're merely diseases of the physical body that make it difficult for your hardware, your brain, to communicate with your soul. So that in these two counter-rotating fields that I feel around the body, the masculine and feminine aspect, whichever one is dominant, regardless of what your gender is what determines your gender identity. So if I have a dominant feminine spinning of consciousness, then even though because I'm male, I would consider myself as a gay individual because I would be feminine.
Okay.
Doesn't matter gender, it's which is dominant. So as I walk up to a person, if I hold my hand out like this, as though I'm reaching to shake hands, I can tell their masculine aspect of consciousness will hit the palm of my hand. Their feminine aspect of consciousness will hit the right. So as I walk through their soul field, I can tell, for example, if they went through an emotional trauma because all of a sudden there's an increase on the amount of pressure on the back of my hand. And for those people who are familiar with how acupuncture works or the meridians in the body, your memories are actually stored in the soul at whatever the meridian flow pattern was at the time of the experience, in a hologram at the intersection of the two aspects of consciousness. So recently I was doing a demonstration, and this person was having some difficulty with their hips and hip pain. And as I stepped into their memories of when they were being born, many feet, about 14 feet away from their physical body, and my comment to them was, wow, my hips are hurting. It feels like you were born breech. Right. And the person said, I was. Because I was actually, as you diminish your own identity, think of it as a projection screen, and you're projecting it, your consciousness onto it, and you're saying, here are my identities, the CPA, the spouse, the parent, the whatever identities. Once you diminish your own identities, all of a sudden you start to perceive other people's projections onto your screen. Once you start to perceive, this is how empathy works, or an empath, is you're actually feeling and perceiving other people's stored memories in their soul. So I actually feel in a lot of empaths their consciousness flowing in over the right ear and into the right temporal parietal junction right here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm looking at myself in the screen, and I'm thinking you're doing it backwards. So that if an empath is picking up on too much garbage from other people and it's giving them discomfort, emotional or physical, if they merely put their hand on their head right here, and though it's like hanging up the phone, you will not pick up on other people's garbage.
So interesting.
Because that's the area of the brain where that comes in. Transmagnetic cranial stimulation, which is being used by psychiatrists for treating depression, current, and a lot of research, is merely working with the interface patterns between consciousness in the soul and the peripheral nervous system as that's intersecting in. So that the majority of physical pain in the body, back pain, for example, if I touch a memory that's stored in someone's soul of a betrayal issue, I'll immediately feel the spinae muscle over their T1, T2 vertebrae in their back tighten up in order to block that from coming in. Wow. That's what gives the proverbial knife in the back feeling that's associated with betrayal, because your muscles are trying to block your peripheral nervous system from allowing that uncomfortable emotional memory from bridging back into your central nervous system. So what happens is, if we have security issues, especially in our childhood, the lumbar region of the spine tightens up. Now, what I found is that as I go back and touch these memories, you can blindfold the person. I don't touch them in any way because I'm many feet from them. I don't say anything, and I'll touch these memories in their soul, and it knocks them off their feet. Because what happens is, and these are things that science hasn't discovered yet.
It's wonderful.
I'm not saying this to brag, but I'm saying it to help people to understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. I'm like a walking MRI in that I feel people's brain activity, even though I'm many feet away from them, because they exist within me, even where they do not have sensory neurons to determine what's going on in their body. So if a lot of times if people have a brain tumor, I'll feel exactly where it's at because my consciousness is perceiving it. I don't need a CAT scan or an MRI to determine what's going on in there. I physically feel it in my consciousness. So that what happens, the physical transmitter receiving device, the interaction in the brain, actually at the brainstem, that is responsible for interaction with the logical aspect of consciousness is the hippocampus. You have a hippocampus in both hemispheres of your brain. That ties to the masculine aspect of consciousness. The amygdala, again, which is in both hemispheres, ties to the feminine aspect of consciousness. So when I touch an emotional memory stored in a person's soul, it will immediately backfeed into their central nervous system and through their amygdala cause their physical body to move just as though I'm taking a hold of them physically.
Oh, wow.
What this does is it makes psychology a science because it eliminates the biased variable of perception. And it's pure science. Touch the event, person moves. Touch the event again, person will move the same way. Next day, they can come back, touch the same event. A lot of times I will work with people who say, well, yes, I had this trauma in my life, but I resolved it. And I'll say, okay, let's check. And I'll walk back and I'll touch the memory in their soul, and all of a sudden their body moves. And I'll say, no, you didn't resolve it, you merely blocked it. So that the majority of, for example, there's 11 evidence-based treatment modalities for PTSD. EMDR, stellate ganglion injection, even hypnosis. while hypnosis can work, and I'm trained in hypnosis, I went through it early on in order to understand how consciousness works. I will not use hypnosis. And my reason for not using hypnosis is because I don't want to play God. Because with hypnosis, you can reach the deep aspects of a person's consciousness and reprogram them. And I've done that, and I've made mistakes, pure motive. But when you're saying something and all of a sudden that person's consciousness perceives that as a new perception of reality, you have to really watch what you're saying. Because in hypnosis, the subject is surrendering their will to you. I have a hard enough time being responsible for my own will, let alone anyone else. So the work that I do is to empower people to grow within their own will, never, ever to have them surrender it to me. I don't want followers. Everything I am teaching and sharing is for people to use as a tool on their own spiritual growth path, whatever they have chosen. Because if you've surrendered your authority to some other human being, then you don't have it to surrender to a higher level within you. See, the big problem with Christians, and I'm a Christian, I grew up a Christian, but the biggest problem is they say Jesus is my Savior, and while he is my Savior, they treat him like a lifeguard, and they say, when I die, he's going to pluck me out and save me. Which would you sooner have? A lifeguard that teaches you how to swim, or a lifeguard that waits until you're drowning to rescue you? A lifeguard that teaches you how to swim.
Sure.
Jesus said, the things that I do and even more, you too shall do. How come nobody's doing these things? Because they're not following his teachings. They're not doing what he said. The things that he taught, which are the same things that Buddha taught, are how to grow spiritually, how your soul grows spiritually, because that's who you really are. You truly are a soul experiencing a physical body, not a physical body having a soul.
Okay, that's a great statement, and I think that's helping a lot of people totally understand this. Because what does the ego have to do with it? Because you haven't mentioned the ego at all, and I was going to ask you that, but you kept going into things that I didn't want.
Well, the ego is the second step in spiritual growth. The ego is where you take your power away from everyone else and you say, I'm in control. It's self-actualization.
Okay, that's where the self-actualization comes
The
in.
ego is a false self, and it's also generally a masculine aspect of consciousness that creates it. Now, whether you are born male or female, you have both aspects of consciousness in your soul.
Mm-hmm.
What is happening right now is people are growing. The reason that the divorce rate has been so high for the last 50 years, the reason that people are growing, people are no longer locked in their classes. People are growing spiritually, and souls grow at different rates. And you are going to be attracted towards people who resonate with wherever your soul is at currently. And you will tend to leave and depart from people in your life who are vibrating at the frequency that you have grown out of. But everybody is growing. And there are earth changes that are coming. We're having global warming, but not for the reason that everybody thinks we are. Global warming is because a higher level of consciousness is upon us. It's the springtime of soul growth. You could say the sun is shining brighter. Remember me saying earlier, one of the attributes of higher consciousness is the intrinsic characteristic of light.
Okay, yeah.
Remember me saying about how fear holds you back from going through the bardo into the brighter light.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a dense, fearful thought, and you put it into a high frequency prayerful thought, it's like putting a dense object in the microwave. It's going to heat up and the sparks are going to fly. I've had people already where I merely take a hold of an object in their soul and say a prayer, and they grab their physical body and say, ow, it feels like a hot knife in there. All it is the higher frequency consciousness transmuting the lower frequency. If you ever saw the Hindu statue of Shiva with the ring of fire, that's exactly what it looks like when I see someone who is spiritually developed and they sit down and meditate, except it's not a ring of fire, it's a sphere that goes all the way around them. And if a low frequency, it's the same thing that gives that spark in a baby's eye when they're born, is because they've just come from their divine connection, and the eyes are to the window of the soul, and that spark in the baby's eye is the divine light shining through them. Wow. Stop and think once. As soon as they do something that they know is wrong, they can't look at you because they don't want you to see that their spark is no longer shining through their eyes. It's one of the attributes of being human. So that what happens is, back to this enlightened individual with a spear of fire, when a low frequency thought is either thrown at them by another person or comes from their own historical past and tries to come into their conscious awareness, as I'm perceiving this, it looks just like a bug flying into one of those old electric bug zappers where once it hits it, the sparks fly, the flames fly, and the thing is disintegrated. Wow. It's exactly how the transmutation process works of a low frequency of thought entering a high frequency environment. So that everything that Jesus taught is you have to do this in order to enter the kingdom is merely saying get rid of all your garbage, because you can't hold on to your garbage and exist in heaven or the higher frequency of consciousness. You can enter heaven and the bliss of heaven in meditation.
Okay.
So the two most important things that I say to people as part of their spiritual growth is, number one, always focus upward. Always focus on higher consciousness. Number two, remove the obstacles to love that exist within you so that you can focus to higher consciousness. Now, let's focus on number two. There's a saying in psychology that is very true. If you don't own your unresolved issue, if you don't own your complex, it owns you. You cannot change something unless you first own it. If you play victim, you will not grow spiritually. You have to say to yourself, why did my soul put me in this position of being a victim? What was it that my soul needed to learn? That is the real question, not I'm a victim. Once you recognize, okay, my soul needed to learn compassion. So I took on suffering in my life so that I could learn compassion. Now, by owning that suffering and holding on to it, holding on to the physical and emotional pain, you can, through gratitude and prayer, go to a higher level of consciousness, and you can burn that obstacle to love right out of your soul. You can do this work yourself. I do a demonstration in front of groups where I will have a person think of the worst emotional trauma they have ever experienced. And I'll merely touch them and I'll anchor it on their body. And then I'll have them say a prayer, which I'm anchoring at the same exact spot. I then have them switch back to recalling the traumatic event, and it's gone. Probably 50% of the people can't even remember what it was. And I finally say, but you remember where it happened, who was there? Well, yeah. Where's the emotion? It's gone. By doing that, I help people to bring their higher frequency of consciousness, prayerful thought in, backfeed it through the anchor point in their body. It will dissipate the negative emotion that is attached to that memory in the soul, and instantaneously it is gone forever. I've done this with soldiers who had PTSD from the Vietnam War for 30 years and couldn't work, were on disability, alcoholics, drug addicts. The guy's crying as he tells me about when he hit a landmine when he was driving his truck and blew up the truck and killed his buddy in the passenger seat. And within 3-4 minutes, totally healed permanently. When you heal the soul, it's permanent. When you heal the physical body, it's temporary. I've found with a lot of people that their greatest obstacle to healing is the memory of the trauma or the memory of the accident. Yeah. And they're holding on to that, and as a result of holding on to that, they never allow themselves to heal. So hold on to the trauma, hold on to the emotion, take it to a higher level. Sometimes those traumas are so great, so powerful that we can't even hold on to them. In those instances, go to the higher level without holding on to it and ask for the higher level of consciousness to come down and help you deal with this burden that is so heavy you can't bear it.
So are you
that
saying
will happen?
Are you saying to do that in meditation?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. In meditation, because this is higher consciousness coming to help you. This is why Jesus referred to the helper spirit. This is why it's the Holy Spirit. It's viewed as light.
Okay.
It's coming to help you, to your level, to help you with issues that are too great for you to lift up to the higher level to get rid of them.
Okay, you know what? We're going to stop here because we could go on forever, and you have given us so much beautiful information, Lee. I mean, it's just, I can't stop listening. It's so beautiful, and it's so transforming for people to hear your words, because it's such a new way of looking at who we are and what the soul is. And it's something we're ready for it, obviously, because you're bringing it through.
I thank you. I thank you for doing this video, because I'm just now beginning to share. It's just time for people to hear this and to awaken. There's a lot of tidbits out there, and a lot of what I'm telling people are things they already know. I'm just helping them pull it together. I am beginning to do workshops and travel. I generally do my workshops for free, my lectures for free, because I'm doing this to help people. I'm not doing it to make a living. I do sometimes have to charge for venues and to cover travel expenses, airfares and so forth, but I try to keep things as low cost as possible. I am just now setting up my website, which is thescienceofthesoul.com. The Science of the Soul, it has to have THE before it in order to make it to my website. We're including a lot of videos like this and hopefully pulling things together that will be good tools to help people grow spiritually. I welcome people to contact me. My email address is just my name with my middle initial. Lee, middle initial S, last name Lawrence, @gmail.com. Just Lee S. Lawrence @gmail.com. So my apologies. I get a lot of emails and a lot of contacts. If I don't get back to you right away, please contact me again. I don't mind, and my apologies. It's not that I'm ignoring people. It's that so many people are contacting me.
Yes, thank you, Lee, for all that. And I know you're going to offer a free gift, and you're going to come up with that when you're working on what you really want to give. So did you decide yet, or you're going to share that later?
No, I've decided.
Okay.
I have a short guided meditation that I'm beginning to do it in the presentations, and it's to help people to raise their consciousness to a higher level. But I really don't want people following my voice. I don't want them listening to my words to go on their meditation. So I will include a transcript of this guided meditation. And the ideal situation is that everyone takes this guided meditation from the transcript and records it with some background music in their own voice. So that when you're meditating and listening, you're not listening to me telling you what to do, you're listening to yourself telling you what to do.
That's beautiful. Love that. That's really profound. That's yes, and you're empowering people right there to listen to their own voice.
I don't want people following my advice. Take what fits and bring it in and create your own model. I tell people I always reserve the right to be wrong. Buddha would give people incorrect information because he wanted them to learn discernment. You want people to be able to, God likes a flat organizational chart. Everyone is to have their own direct connection to the boss, never through an intermediary in a physical body.
Wow. It's beautiful. Wow. Profound words there, Lee. You are amazing. And I'm just going to say, I would love our audience to contact us. We will have a link to Lee's gift, and any comments about the show, we would love you to share it, and Lee will hear them as well. I'll be sharing them with Lee. And Lee, thank you again so much for being a magnificent beacon of light, of new thought and science. And you share selflessly and brilliantly. And you're sharing your own divine light, which is the show. This is why I created this, and you're helping people unlock their passions, ignite who they really are, their authenticity, and to create the lives they love as they learn how to reconnect with their souls. So thank you again, Lee. And my name is Janet Miller, and I will see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.